Hello, I'm Devo, and today I'll be trying out Unity for the first time to see what a newcomer can do in just 1 hour. And so, I've got a timer ready, so let's get right into it. I realized, after recording this, that I didn't really talk at all about what I'm doing, or rather trying to do. So, I decided to add this commentary after the fact, and just speed through any parts I had less to say about. I also didn't want to stop to look anything up during the recording in order to just force myself to get familiar with things and where they are. My first goal was to just try and figure out what things did what. Like here, I realized how I can move the position of the camera around, or change its rotation, which I think is like pointing the camera in different directions or tilting it side to side, so it changes what and how the camera sees things, but not really changing where it's looking from. And then scale, which is probably just like zooming in, but since I don't have anything to look at, I can't really tell. There were a lot of fields I still don't know what they affect, so I just kept poking around to see what did or said something that I could recognize. And so here, I thought I'd found one such thing. What I thought a tile palette might be was a template I thought I could place for the background to set things on top of. And that might be right, but I was hoping I would have some sample textures, even if it was just a solid color. And I might be able to do that, but I wasn't able to find it this time. Because I confused this icon that is just meant to show that there's something there while I'm still making things, but the icon doesn't show up in the game at all. Thankfully, I was able to find something I could use before the 10-minute mark, that being these dynamic sprites. Now, why is it a circle and not some other shape? As far as I can tell, it's because of the sprite renderer section on the right there, but I didn't find a way to change it, as I was more preoccupied with figuring out why it was in the physics menu, and hoping I could make it move. But because I also did need to change the background somehow, I even tried linking up the circle with the palette just to see if that made that icon move finally, because I had the circle as a reference now. Unfortunately, even when I found this list of icons here in a second, I could tell that this wasn't the place where I could use them for game art. This small pointer finger symbol was also mysterious, as it seemed to limit the range I could move the circle to just one side of the screen, while I thought it would just make it not able to move at all, which obviously wasn't the case. So, back to making shapes, I thought it would be worthwhile if I tried messing around with the 3D one as well, just to see if that helped me understand their differences. And while not helpful to my larger goals, I did also discover that selecting both could change both of them at once. I finally found the basics of what I was looking for with this platformer effector 2D that seems to be doing the majority of the work for me from here on out, as I figure out its different settings and requirements, like the biggest one pointed out by this yellow caution sign. So here, I started trying to give the circle this rectangle as a ground in order to collide and sit on top of. Until I finally pieced it together that the Used by Effector checkbox was located in the Circle and Box Collider 2D sections. Once I remembered that I had turned off the platformer effector, that is. And once I had, I was hoping that would make these shapes not overlap with each other while still in the editor. But no luck there, even after messing with the collider's settings. Here, I was able to get that parent and child relationship to work though, which I thought would be a beginner way to make more complicated shapes besides circles and squares. But I still needed some way to control these moving shapes, even if just with a keyboard. So I started my search for a component to make that happen. With no luck once again, especially when all those objects didn't show up when I figured out how to test the game. I even lost the menu that they were in for a bit. Until I finally pulled them into the scene I was working in at the beginning, where the camera can actually see it. Because I must have been working in another scene that whole time. And look, things finally moved when I tested it. And so, as I was trying to figure out what was different between the two shapes, I found this one checkbox that I thought would let them collide as I had hoped, just to see it didn't make much difference. So I had to know what difference it did actually make to adjust the mass of the circle. And also what things I had done or added that were actually needed for the movement to work. Like the fact that the rectangle was different because it was missing a rigid body 2D component, like the physics objects came with. So I had to know how this static object was different. And since that worked, I had to see if the 2D circle would cut through the 3D cube or not. And it did, but I still felt the need to have shapes that were connected. And thus I tried to reach this goal with two dynamic shapes, hoping that the higher one would stop in the air once the parent touched down on the ground. But only the collider for that shape seemed to have that kind of effect. A part of that effect was also to get rid of the red error code that was on the bottom of the screen this whole time. That I simply hadn't noticed until now, when it pops up again, as if seeing it for the very first time. I have no idea what that issue was, but it didn't seem to keep me from doing what I was doing. But I still didn't know the full difference between static and dynamic, other than a guess that one doesn't move and the other does. But that doesn't really help me with what kinematic is. Like, why does it go into the rectangle now? Which I'm only now just realizing might be the effect I wanted earlier, of a child shape staying relative to the parent one. And I also see now that pressing the pause button up top lets me see where the shapes will end up at the point I paused it, which is useful for planning things out. And so, with less than 5 minutes left, I finally had things moving in more than one direction with this roll off the edge. So of course I had these two circles collide off of each other. And don't worry, I let the slower one fall all the way off too, for completion's sake. But with only 3 minutes left at that point, I really started to feel the pressure, and just tried to fill in anything else I could for the backdrop. But it seemed like I did need to get something outside the program first, and bring it in, before any of these tools would do anything visible. In the end, I wasn't able to figure out why the sprite's default material for 2D, or default material for 3D, were grayed out where I couldn't affect them. But I think it must be another thing requiring me to have something to edit. I also didn't see how two shapes with overlapping colliders would behave when I pressed play. And finally, I can't believe I never clicked on the option in the sprite renderer for defining the shape. So, I will be trying out a lot of these things next time I get into it.